All right, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today for our webinar on BIM for project management. So we're going to be going over a couple things today. First off, just a little bit of an intro about Microdesk, if you're not familiar with us. We are an AECO Industry consulting firm. We've been in business since '94. We have 11 locations across the U.S., and we actually have our international office over in the UK. And our team is a little bit different from most other companies in this field in that we're very top-heavy on the technical side. So we have, at this point, over 100 different technical specialists whose background comes from the actual field. Myself, I worked in architecture for over 10 years before moving this. So in terms of different companies that we work with, we partner with Autodesk, IBM, Bluebeam, KnowledgeSmart, Tribble for Sketchup. So we work with a lot of the different tools that you're probably already working with. And then, because we've worked in the field, we understand not just how to use the buttons and picks and clicks, we understand how they're actually used in production. Now, for today's presentation, today's presenter is going to be myself, Peter Marchese. My background is as an architect, and I've been in the field for over 20 years, including working at Microdesk. My focus over the last several years has been more on the emerging technologies, whether it's UAVs, cloud tools, augmented and virtual reality. I've been focusing on a lot of the new and upcoming information and tools and how they actually can be used productively within practice. Now, for today's webinar, everybody's going to be on mute. I am going to be keeping an eye on the questions box as well as the chat window. So if you do have any questions, you want to ask about something, just feel free to pop it in there. If it fits into what I'm going over at that moment, I'll make sure I answer it at that time. If it doesn't, I'll make sure I get to it at the end with the Q&A. And if there are questions, definitely please feel free to reach out in there. And otherwise, we'll get rolling. So for today, we're going to be talking about BIM for project management. In the beginning of that will be the sort of the typical WhyBIM. We'll touch on a little bit in terms of how BIM is different from CAD from a management and setup perspective. Talk a little bit about the marketing and the way that impacts people's perception of BIM, proposals, contracts, how to create a project plan, a little overview on that, and how things are going to change in the delivery planning. This presentation is actually sort of an abbreviated, condensed version of a seminar or training class that we have for project managers for companies. So this gives you a little bit of a taste of what we would go through for that. Now, before we get rolling, I would like to ask the audience just a couple of quick questions. So, in terms of who is actually attending here, just to get a better idea, make sure I'm going over the right information. So first one's going to be, what is your role? Alrighty. Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for voting on that one. And then the next thing is, are you actually currently using BIM? So that could be Revit, it could be Navisworks, it could be some of the cloud tools. AutoCAD does not count towards that. Perfect. Great to see. We're definitely getting a lot of people with the yes on that. And the last quick one here. Are you currently using any cloud tools or mobile tools, whether it's to take your information out into the field or easily access it from anywhere? Or are you using things like maybe BIM360 Glue or Team, so that way you can more easily share your work? Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your information. Perfect. All right, let's get rolling. So start off here is why BIM. Most people probably have seen this, where the idea of BIM is that it's putting together collaboration, productivity, and insight together. So that way we can actually be much more informative about our design. We can make the right decisions earlier and be more productive. And this is for all the different portions of a project. It's not just in design. It's not just in construction. And it goes on into operations and maintenance, which tends to be the more expensive side of the whole process. The other idea of this is to make sure that where there are changes, we're not having to lose our work. So if you look at the typical sawtooth, when we go from planning to design, we might have to start over if we used certain tools. And when we go from design to construction, now we have to remodel certain aspects. Again, losing work, losing time. While that's not that, well, while that can be a problem during the design process and working in CAD, the big benefit of this is making sure that everything is correct when we get into construction. Because if we have to make changes there, it's going to be a lot more expensive. So if we find out that certain things don't line up, now it's not as simple as just moving it on a computer screen. Now, what's relating to WhyBIM, it's better and it's easier when it comes to coordination. So rather than looking at old drawings, for those of us who remember, putting Mylars together on a pin board and try to see through that, or using an AutoCAD file with way too many layers and lines and trying to discern what's above what, it's a lot easier when we can actually see it in 3D and it just pops out at us, oh, there's our problem. That's how they line up. That's what we're working with. Now, that's not to say that BIM is 3D, but we'll touch on that in a bit. The other thing is it's starting to open up more opportunities for us, more things that we can use for billable services, whether that is running different kinds of analysis to show that you can provide a better, more environmentally friendly or more energy efficient design, whether it's creating virtual reality or augmented reality designs, or just better for presentation and selling. And in some cases, it's actually becoming required. So certain cities, countries are actually creating certain guidelines. And in many cases, this is all over the world. We're finding more and more places that are creating some form of protocol that if you're going to be doing projects, it has to be in BIM. Only certain areas have government mandates, UK being one of them. If you're doing a government project, it requires a certain level of BIM. If you're doing it in the US, you have to have specific groups in different locations or different government entities that are requiring it, similar to how the US Army has, Corps of Engineers has mandates. But we're starting to find that this isn't just a, well, I'd like to move into BIM. It's okay, well, if you're doing this project, you have to. And when we start looking at that, we're trying to figure out, well, why are the benefits? A lot of the times we're finding the design companies are doing this to maintain their business. They're getting more repeat business by having a better end product. The short-term goals kind of feed into the long-term goals, whether it's having new business or reducing the reducing the errors. That's going to lead into reducing the project duration and having increased profits, for example. And this isn't just for the design side. In terms of who's going to benefit from this, we're finding that it's going to be benefiting everybody on the project, typically in different levels and for different reasons. But a lot of them are focusing on that reducing errors and emissions and also marketing new business. So whether it's owners or the designers, you're looking at very similar benefits, and that's one of those things where we're looking at BIM as a team project. When we start talking about IPD, everybody's going to find certain things that it's really going to focus for them. But everybody together is going to have similar benefits that they can expect to get. Now, in terms of the BIM versus CAD, CAD's been around for a very long time. It's been updated for many years. And it's actually pretty nice now. So let's say that this Mustang here is CAD. The key thing here is no matter how good CAD is looking there, BIM is still going to be better in most cases. It's still going to allow you to do more. Certain things, if I'm just drawing a couple of lines, yeah, that might be faster to do in CAD. I still prefer to do it in the BIM application, say like Revit as opposed to AutoCAD, because I know once I've gotten comfortable with it, I can do almost anything faster there than AutoCAD. Now, the problem that comes from this is that even if you're using the airplane, some people still like to try to use it like the car. So just because you've got all this experience in CAD, now you're trying to force that new tool, whether it's Revit or something else, to be used like you used the old one. And that's only just going to lead to problems. So in that case, you want to use it as it was intended. I'm not going to sit there and try to drive the plane on the ground. I want it to actually take off and use it to its fullest. Now, in terms of how these tend to be looked at, when we're focusing on the CAD workflow, that tends to have, you've got your base file, that file gets brought into a sheet file, and then you've got your view on the sheet. And that tends to be very sort of separated. You've got different base files being linked into different other sheets to be backgrounds, and everything's very separated, partially because it has to be. You're not going to have 2 or 3 people working on the exact same file at the exact same time. You're going to be trading things back and forth. Now, when we look at sort of a Revit or BIM workflow, it's Similar idea in that you've got models and views, but it's the same file typically. And then from there we have that singular model that has many, many views of the same model, and then we just put those views in a sheet. And in many cases, if you're doing a large project or even a medium or small size project, you might only need that one file that you're working on for your documentation. There'll be multiple files, architectural, structural, mechanical, but in terms of the documentation that you need to produce, you don't necessarily have to separate it out into 15 different files. So what ends up happening is you go from having a very disconnected workflow to a much more connected workflow. And even just saying that, that tends to lead into some of the fun things. What I mean by that is the marketing savvy portion of this. So everyone's probably heard more than 100 different buzzwords when it relates to BIM. But there's always the reality of that situation. You can almost tell when someone's trying to sell you something because the sound is so great. So usually an acronym, something like BIM. And the reality of that is that the model is not the key element in BIM. I said before, 3D does not equate to BIM. 3D in some respects is a side effect. I can make a really awesome looking 3D model, but it could be dumb as a bag of rocks. The key portion here is that I. Some people say BIM is building information modeling. Others say building information management. It really comes down to what are you using it for. Because BIM is going to have multiple use cases. You might have the BIM design model, the BIM construction model. There are different use cases, but in all of them, it's that data that is inside of it, the intelligence that you put in it. Otherwise, you just have, 3D. Now, leading from that, where you have different kinds of it, there's the idea of the single source of truth. Every project is going to have multiple models. Could you have everybody working in the exact same file, architecture, structure, mechanical, site? Yeah, you could, but it's not really beneficial. It's going to slow things down, and it's going to cause other issues. Still working with background files and focusing on who's doing what, it'll be much more smooth. And as it is right now, everybody is still working on their own files from a discipline standpoint. And then from there, we have clash-free. Everyone's looking for a clash-free project, but you still have to define that clash. What do you consider a clash? If something is physically running through something else, or something can actually be installed where you've put it. It's easy when you're putting models together almost like Legos, where I can make this fit. But when you start to consider, okay, well, can a person physically get into this location to service, to install, to check? Can we actually get this equipment through the building to the room it needs to be in? There's a difference between a perfectly coordinated building and a clash-free model. And sometimes when you're saying one thing, you're going to understand it as one thing, and somebody else is going to understand it as another one. And that's when we start getting into the coordinated side of things. Saying your project is coordinated, you still have to determine how. What did you coordinate? How did you coordinate them? In terms of running clashes, how did you run those? What was the defining characteristic? Were you having range in there? Were you looking at how things were set up in terms of being installed? So there's different ways to look at these things. And you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Now, from there, we start looking at some of the terminology. Like, what do these things mean? Well, BIM, again, you've got building information modeling or management, depending on how you're looking at it. But the idea of that is that you have a workflow for this design. You're putting your intelligence and information there. And it's going to travel with this project or with this design. So whether from early on analysis, design, documentation, into the fabrication, you're connecting all these things and sharing that information. You have a process. Again, BIM is not a program. It's a process. It's a workflow of actually connecting everything. Now, sort of in a similar vein, you have IPD. IPD is Integrated Project Delivery. Now, how this differs from BIM is that it's a workflow or a process of providing that project. So within this, you have a couple of different phases. You've got conceptualization, criteria design, throughout. And at each step, one of the big things is saying, okay, well, who is doing what, how are they doing it, and when are they doing it? So you're actually seeing here that, okay, well, the owner is involved in these locations. The designer is here. And this ties a lot into things like the BIM execution plan. With IPD, a lot of times you'll see the companies work together and actually create a limited liability partnership. So they're agreeing not to sue each other. They're going to work on the project as if they're all one company to really pump it out correctly. But the main thing is determining who is doing what, when, and how. Now, from there, we also have LOD. So that stands for level of design or detail. And you can see here a very basic idea of a column. From a 100, it's going to be just a box that covers this space. 200 is a very generic shape. Then 300, you're starting to get more detailed. You'll have things like the fillets on the corners. 350, we start introducing some of the actual structural components. And then 400 is basically fabrication. So LOD, at the moment, there's really two different standards. One would be the AIA standard. The other one would be the one from BIM Forum. Both of them are good. And this is something to understand when someone's asking for a, I need a level 300 model. Okay, well, define that. Which level 300 are we looking at, and are they looking at it for a specific portion of that model? I'll get to that a little bit more in the BIM execution plan. Now, sort of in the same vein as LOD, we also have something that's relatively new called LOA. That means level of accuracy. If anybody here has worked on a project that included laser scanning, this is kind of where that comes in. So let's say I've got an existing building, I've gone out and I've got a laser scan, and as part of my deliverable, I have to create a model based on that scan. Okay, well, what's the level of accuracy that my deliverable model must achieve? Now, an example of this is, let's say that, real world, that wall is a little bit wavy in plan, and it's also canted inward in elevation. Well, am I expected to make a modeled wall that is exactly on top of that? Or am I going to have a wall that, when I'm drawing it in, say, Revit or AutoCAD or whatever else, it's orthogonal in the plan, and it's vertical in the model? What's that level of accuracy that I have to achieve for that? If I'm putting in beams, am I doing a beam that's going to be warped if it is warped in reality? So ensuring that, again, everybody, all the partners on the project are on the same page and understand what is going to be delivered. Then, again, that last one, clash. When I say I'm running a clash, am I being clear about what that means or what that entails? Am I making sure everybody understands, the accuracy that I'm working with? Am I clashing just physical objects, or am I clashing actual, reference planes or space to work around? And then when we get past that, we start looking at how do we manage all those different expectations. If I say I want a clash-free model, what actually lays out what that means? And that would be our contracts or BIM execution plans. Now, for some of these, we're going to be looking at our proposals. Those are typically going to be the response to an owner. AIA has different documents that focus specifically on this. And the goal here is to clearly define what it is that we're giving. So if I'm going to be creating this, I'm going to model it, it's going to be applicable to this, this is what we're going to use it for, and at the different milestones of the project, this is how you can expect it. So an example of this is, if you remember those columns from the image earlier, at project milestone 1 and 2, it might just be a level 100 detail object, a big box. When we get to milestone 3, at that point, I'll have an idea of the real shape and size of it. So then I might have a simple W section. So things like that. But I'm actually including all that information and saying what we're going to achieve, what we're going to achieve, and making sure that we are clearly defining all of our deliverables. Now, on the BIM execution side of things, this is sort of going to be a partnership with that proposal. So a similar idea for that would be if you look at a drawing. The photo is 1,000 words, similar to the drawing to specs. This is kind of the same thing for our proposal. So it's going to include all the information like who the contacts for the project are, what version of software we're using, very important for BIM, the specs that might be required, how we're transferring information, and in many cases, the BIM uses goals and standards that we're all going to adhere to. Now, the important part of the objectives and goals are, I could make a model that is a good model 10 different ways. And those 10 different ways are going to differ based on what I feel the use case might be. If I'm running analysis, if I'm doing physical clash, if I'm doing material takeoffs, all those different things might make me model a slightly different way, because if I don't have to do them, there's no reason to model to a certain level of detail. So ensuring that when you're actually creating your execution plan, it's covering the priorities, the BIM uses, the needs in the project, who is going to do what, and how and when. And a very important thing, I feel, with any execution plan is to not rely on a number to explain what you're doing. Always have, whether it's in an appendice or in the actual document itself, graphics that explain exactly what you intend. Again, I can say one thing, and most people, if I say LOD 100, will have a rough idea of what I mean. But when I'm working on something that can be considered a contractual document, I do not want to settle for a rough idea. I want to make sure that everybody is on the exact same page and understanding, so that way when I do submit my deliverable, it's what was expected. Now, in terms of creating a project plan to put all this into effort, put all this into practice, first thing we're going to be looking at is the actual project plan. Figuring out, okay, well, what are the parties involved? Who are we working with? How are we actually going to share our content? Now, are we using Dropbox? Are we using A360 Drive, BIM360 Team, Docs? Are we going to be coordinating regular? Are we going to be working on the same files? And making sure that we're all on the same page and we have a good plan to move forward with. From there, we have to determine what are the actual requirements. Most people have probably seen that cartoon where, this is how the customer explained it, this is how everybody designed it, and that's what the customer really wanted. And as much of a joke as that cartoon really is, the reality is that happens on more than enough projects. So making sure that you all sit down and go over what the actual client needs are, and that you have a plan to achieve exactly that. Whether that involves doing different kinds of analysis, or you're delivering something for facility maintenance. This depends on what you're going for. But make sure you know what that is. And then from there, determining what you're going to be using that BIM for. Is it just documentation? Are we also going to be doing different kinds of an analysis, coordination, or building towards fabrication? And then how are we going to be planning for coordination? Do we expect to be using different tools to actually model our clearances? Are we going to be doing clash detection? And certain things are going to be very specific on that. If I'm just doing documentation, I might draw all my walls from slab to slab, even if in reality that wall's only going to go above the ceiling 6 inches. But if I'm doing a project where I know I'm going to be doing clash detection, I'm going to be modeling the wall heights more accurately because I know that's going to be something that's important. And from there we have different protocols. What formats are we using? How are we sharing? And also what are the standards that we're adhering to? Whether it's a naming convention or it's just a graphic or a file setup or even a versioning, and making sure everybody's on the exact same point from get-go, it's going to save time as it goes on. And then lastly, again, what are you actually delivering? Is this going to be sheets? Do those sheets have to be in CAD? Are they PDFs? Are we submitting a BIM model? Are we submitting BIM data? Like, are we connecting to an asset database? Does the client need renderings or different other tools? Or are we actually giving them certifications from our analysis? And making sure that we have an understanding of what we're actually delivering, so that way, as we plan our time for the team, we're hitting it. We're not getting too many unexpected issues popping up. Now, in terms of that project plan, we can lay out exactly what we need and how we're going to do that. And as part of that, we might start looking about what tools are we actually going to use to deliver this. Now, in this case, we can look at the different time frames of our project and look at a plethora of different tools and software that we might have at our disposal to work from this. But rather than looking at a huge list of programs and trying to figure out, well, I want to use this, this, and this, it's usually easier to work back from our defined goals. So let's say on this project, we know we need CDs, we have to do analysis, estimating, and we have to present to planning boards as well. Okay, well, that's good to know. Now, we know we're going to be using Revit in this case to create our CDs. Okay, well, are we going to start off in Revit, though? Not really, no. We might have a team that wants to use something else. So in this case, let's say that the team wants to use Sketchup. Well, we can bring Sketchup directly into Revit, but we can also take that through Format Pro or just work in Format on its own and create that content. We might also have a team that wants to use Rhino. Again, I can bring Rhino directly into Revit, but if I want to make this a little bit more intelligent, I don't want to have just objects that are sort of static or blocky. I want to have native Revit content, I might use a tool called Dynamo to translate that into a Revit element. Okay, now I have an idea of how I'm going to start from the very beginning, get into Revit, and go to CDs. Perfect. Now, if I'm doing analysis, maybe what I'll end up doing is using Insight 360, working off of the Revit model so I don't have to sort of fork my development time and have one team working over here and know that I'm going to have to redo work between them. And then the other thing is if I have to meet it with a planning board, I can use excuse me, InfraWorks, and then I can take my Revit model, put it in there, and actually show from a planning standpoint, this is where the building is going to be, this is how you can see it from here, this is how it's going to impact traffic, and I can do all of that, again, maintaining that connection, working off of my main design tool. And if I'm using estimating, I might look at Navisworks, take Revit, bring it into that, and then I can do my quantity takeoff. So I'm looking at all the different tools that are possible for each of the specific end goals, and then I can work back from that and say, okay, well, which ones am I going to work with? So I've got an idea of what my deliverables are for the client. I now have an idea for what tools I need. Now I have to figure out who's actually going to work on the project. So you have an idea of the tools that are going to be part of this, and now you're trying to figure out which portions of your staff actually have that skill. And what we come across a lot is that you might have a project team person who tells you, oh yeah, my Revit skills, they're 8 out of 10. But the reality is, 8 out of 10 of what? You know, are we talking that, you know, all you can do is model? You know, what is your role going to be? What if I need you to do analysis? What if I need you to create content? There's a lot of nuances within, you know, a software nowadays. Nothing is, you know, all it does is this. It does a lot of different things. So trying to figure out who on your team is going to be applicable is powerful and important. And one of the things that we've been doing internally, as well as a lot of our clients, is using tools like Knowledge Smart. Essentially, you create assessments, have people go through them, and from that you start to get an idea of not just where that one person is, but where your company is. And from that you can determine that, okay, well, this person is great at this aspect, but not these. So I can focus on getting them trained and up to speed on that. I can start setting goals. I can see where we are as a company. Like if we see we have a project coming in and we know it's going to need, say, massing tools or organic forms, I can get out ahead of that and make sure that there's training or practice scheduled beforehand to make sure our team is ready. And it also helps you determine who on that team is going to be beneficial for that. Now, looking at things up until this point, we're mostly looking at how you set the project up, how you can look at different things. One of the key things here is, well, how do you as the project manager actually look at the work? Now, and a lot of times, people might be expecting you to open up something like Revit or Navisworks. And those are great. If you open up the Revit model, you can actually get in and see all the nitty-gritty of what's going on. If you open up Navisworks, again, it can be a very complex tool, but it's also a lighter weight model. So again, I can look in there, I can click on objects, and I can see the properties. But for a PM, a lot of the times you don't have the time, or you just don't have a computer that's even powerful enough to run some of these tools. So what we're looking at now are different tools that are focused for something that can be used as a project management viewer. So we look at things like BIM 360 Glue. This is a tool that can work either on a desktop launcher, there's a mobile app for it, or you can look at it in a browser. And this allows me to open up the models, put different models together to coordinate them, see how they fit together, cut sections, and actually do markups in there as well. Now, while Glue is great for that, there's also another tool that's just completely web-based. Again, has a free app for Android as well as iOS, and that's BIM 360 Team. And what I'm looking at here is actually something that tells me what's changed. And for a PM, if you're sort of tracking the project, and I know that we should be here by this point, what has changed since last time? I want to see what's been done by one of my consultants. If you notice in the upper corner here, you actually have version 4 versus version 3. And based on the color here, it's telling me what's new, what's been deleted or removed, and what's actually been modified. And the great thing about this is I can actually start to filter that information. I can cut that back or simplify it or even search within it to say, only show me these specific things that have changed. Only show it to me if the properties have changed or the physical location has moved. So we're seeing more tools that have a great ease of use. They're accessible from just about anywhere. And a PM can use these to do markups, track changes, and actually communicate with others both on their team as well as other teams. And if we're looking at something that's less of a graphic of the model, but more of a graphic of where are we with things, we're seeing much more data analytics enter the field. So a lot of companies use Office 365, so Microsoft Office, Outlook, Excel, and one of the tools that are there is a tool called Power BI. And the great thing is it actually shows me all these great graphics in terms of what's happening. And it is possible to connect a Revit model or project to this. So that way, as I'm working, I can actually see, okay, well, how are things going? How many things have been added to the model this week? You know, when I initially set this project up, I did a quick cartoon set, or I looked at other examples, and I figured, okay, we're going to have 60 sheets. How many sheets do we currently have? How many do we expect? What's the percentage of time being spent on these? So I can start to pull all that kind of data out of my project now and view it in different methods. Do I prefer to view it as a 3D model and actually click on objects and get the properties? Do I prefer to view it as 2D sheets so I can just mark them up on a computer the way I used to with a pen? Or do I want to look at something that's a little bit more Excel or just data-driven, just to give me an overview of where things might be? All those abilities are there now, and they're becoming much more ubiquitous and easier to work with. So a couple of things that we looked at here. First one is essentially, well, why BIM? Well, main reason is money. So what we're finding is that in order to do certain projects, there are BIM requirements. By using BIM, most companies, typically not on the first project, but you're going to find out that you're going to be saving money. Probably not in so much of time, because if you have a certain amount of time, you're going to use it one way or another, but you'll have a better project. It'll be more coordinated. You'll be able to do more with that project and have a better deliverable. We talked a little bit about the marketing, all the fun buzzwords that are always out there. We went over some of the benefits of proposals and how those are relating to things with the BIM execution plan. Then talked a little bit about planning for the delivery and some of the tools for the managers. And in many respects, the most important thing is remember just to stay calm. If you're coming from that background where you've been using AutoCAD for a very long time, you probably already know just by experience. You can say by heart, okay, if I have this size of a project, this kind of a project, I'll need this many people for this much time. And that's great. Moving to that Revit workflow or to a BIM workflow, it's going to be different. In some respects, it might feel like you're starting from scratch. But that's why in a lot of places what they're doing is they're setting their PM up that has a lot of experience with a technical lead that has a lot of experience on the technical side. So that way there's a knowledge share between the two users. So the technical person starts to learn more project management skills. The PM starts to learn more of the current technical skills. So that way both of them bring each other up and make sure that the project is going to be more successful. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that pop up into the chat window or into the questions box. I'm keeping an eye on that. One that popped up is for BIM 360 Team, what's needed to get a model in there. If you're using collaboration for Revit, your files are already going to be on there. Essentially, whenever you save your file, it's going to save it to the cloud. However, if you want to, you can just drag and drop Revit, AutoCAD, Navisworks, PDFs onto BIM 360 Team, and you'll be able to view them on there as well as on a mobile device. And the image that I've shown with the difference where it shows you what's changed from version to version, you can look at things normally. You can also look at the sheets that might be inside of those files as well. The slides for this presentation aren't available anywhere right now. The video from this should be posted on our YouTube page probably within the week. And again, this is sort of a shortened version, Cliff Notes version of our BIM for Project Management seminar. So if you're interested in this and much more of a larger one, we have a full class for that. Another question, is BIM available to view via smart or iPhone? Yes. The mobile tools that I mentioned for, say, BIM 360 Glue, for BIM 360 Team, there's a handful of tools that can do that have free mobile apps that you can download and view the model from a mobile device, both on Android as well as iOS. Okay, what is the MOA when discussed with LOA? That was the measurement of accuracy. So how accurate is the scan data that you're starting with? So, and some of that's going to come down to what is the hardware that you're using. If I go out there with a tape measure and I'm just holding the dumb end and reading off, the the level of accuracy I'm going to be getting from the field isn't going to be that hot. If you're using a laser scanner, that's typically going to be in anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. Okay. Another question here. People are looking for a single location for projects to be shared. Now, in that case, I'd want to define shared a little bit better. The reason I say that is, if you're looking at a place to share your content as more of a portal, I upload it, you download it. Then there's a handful of them. And you got BIM 360 Team, Docs, Glue. All of those can actually just sort of store and view the file and allow for markups. And I can treat it almost as a Dropbox. I upload it, and you download it, and then we work on it in our respective offices. Now, if what we're looking about this as a single location for projects to be shared and collectively worked on, that's a different story. If the tool that we're focusing on is Revit, then that would be BIM 360 Team, because collaboration for Revit allows us to work on a file that's stored online. So if I'm in New York, you're in California, we can both work on the same file from our locations. There's also a few other tools that work for that, like Revit Server, if you're all in your own network. Another question in terms of certification for BIM managers. I believe there is actually like a class you can take that has a certification. I might be wrong. I want to say that it has to do with the General Contractors Association, but I'm not sure. I'd have to double check on that. Question here, when you're using a laser scanner, does it directly work with Revit? I do know of one plugin that as you take scans, it's kind of like the little handheld scanner that just tells you the distance that you're reading, that can tie into Revit. So I would have my laptop in the field, I'd use this and say, okay, this is 11'8", and it would just make the wall that dimension. If what you're working off of, though, is content from an actual laser scan, so a point cloud, typically what that's going to do is you can take that through, say, Recap, and that can simplify that or put them together and send them into Revit. And then depending on my use case, if I just need to see the rest of the building for context, perfect, I bring it in and I'm finished. But if I have to create physical geometry in Revit from that point cloud, then I can actually trace that and work off of it. And you can snap to the point clouds. And you can even bring those into Navisworks to do clash detection. Another question here. Is BIM 360 Team an additional service or part of the building design suite? If you're getting collaboration for Revit, which is not part of the suite, that comes with BIM 360 Team. However, Team you can get on your own, on its own. So if you're not using C4R, but you do want to have a central location for people to upload, share, and view content, you can get Team by itself. And that now has different tiered pricing based on how many seats you're going to be getting. So it could be as little as, I think, $4, $2 or $4 per person per month. Question about using dimensions. Is it possible to show both in and now? So in terms of using metric or imperial. One of the nice things about Revit is it doesn't really care about the format. Meaning that if I need to dimension in both, I can actually dimension in both. I'm just going to tell the individual dimensions what format I want them to read out in. So if your background is in metric and you're using a project that's in inches and feet, I can just type in the number and then followed by an M, and it'll actually put it in that dimension, but the actual dimension will read in imperial. But if I want to show both, I just have to make sure I'm having that set up inside of the settings for the dimensions itself. Okay, in terms of simultaneously show on the same dimension, I don't believe that's there yet. If you're doing some custom things, we might be able to set that up, possibly using Dynamo, but I don't believe at this right now. I have to double check though. It's been a while since I've needed to try to do that. Okay, another couple of questions here. Anthony actually got back. It is actually the AGC, and they have a construction manager for BIM certification. Thank you very much for the clarification. Question here regarding Sketchup. What is the best way to bring Sketchup into Revit? When you're bringing when you're bringing that design in, does it need to be broken down by family or brought into Format first? For me, it kind of depends on what my use case is. If my work in Sketchup is more of an overall forms, just something to work with as massing, and I just want to trace around it, I'll just bring it in normally as a SketchUp element, trace it, and get rid of it. If my work in SketchUp is something where I started it there, and then I want to bring it in and continue to play with it, I would probably bring it into Format, and then I can start massing and modeling it and editing it. And then as I get more detailed, I can bring it into Revit. If what I've done is I've gotten very detailed in SketchUp, and some of the elements in there I want to keep, but I want to actually control them, meaning that I want to categorize it. I want to be able to schedule it. I want to be able to turn it on and off correctly. And then I would definitely bring it into Format, and I would modify the specific elements to be seen as certain kinds of objects. So like I might grab a component from SketchUp that I brought into Format and say, you're no longer just a component, you're now a piece of furniture. You're now a piece of site elements. So when I bring it into Revit, it actually is categorized correctly. I do still want to keep an eye on how detailed or how many faces are in there. A lot of objects that are brought into SketchUp are coming from, say, Max. They might be very faceted. They could be very heavy on the object. Any other questions? Great question here. Is it possible to create a movie from a BIM project now? So if what you're doing is you want to actually show this is how the site would look, or this is how, if you're doing transportation, how the roadway actually works. And the answer to that is very much yes. And there's a handful of tools that you can do that with. You remember the one slide where I showed how I would work back from my deliverables, and I mentioned a tool called InfraWorks. That might be the easiest one to work from there, especially if your background is more on transportation, because I can very quickly create a 3D model of a site. And when I say quickly, I mean 5 minutes. Basically, I draw a box on a map and say this is the area, and it gives me back a model of that from OpenStreetMap data. And then I can go in there and edit that. I can modify that. I can pull Revit models into that, and then I can start actually creating animations. And those animations and videos can either be exported out and saved as like an AVI, or I can actually send them to a mobile device like an iPad to show in front of a client. And this actually ties into the next question. Can Revit be used directly with VR, or does the model need to be exported out to a viewer? Well, if what I'm doing is I'm using InfraWorks, that program actually does have a button that can send directly to a VR headset. So I could be sitting at my desk wearing the headset while I'm working on something in InfraWorks. Now, in terms of Revit, we're going to be actually sending it out to a viewer. And there's a handful of ones that can do that. Iris VR, Live, Stingray. And funny enough, that actually ties into one of our, let me move up a little bit, upcoming webinars. So the next webinar that we have is going to be on 3/14, and that's actually going to focus on the Autodesk Live design workflow. So that right there, Live itself is a viewer. Essentially, I take my Revit model, send it to Live, it bakes all my materials, and then I can walk through that, whether it's on my iPad, my desktop, or with a virtual reality headset. And then Stingray, as part of the Live design workflow, is a game engine that allows me to do pretty much anything, and I can also bring in stuff from InfraWorks there if I'd like. And then the following one is going to be on the BIM 360 family, where we talk about the status of BIM 360 as it's been changing and developing a lot over the last year. Any other questions? Everybody, thank you very, very much for your time. I definitely appreciate it. If there are questions after this that you want to ask, feel free to reach out to Microdesk. We'll be definitely glad to help out. There we go. And anything that comes up, please feel free to reach out. The question regarding the slides, this YouTube video should be, this presentation should be on our YouTube channel probably within the next week. So thank you very much, everybody. If there are questions, reach out. Have a great day.